This Mexican woman was fearless and stopped at nothing to get justice for her daughter. In 2012, Miriam Rodriguez got every parent's worst nightmare. Her daughter, Karen, was missing. After going through every appropriate channel to find her missing daughter, she realized that she probably wasn't alive. But she was determined to find the people that hurt her daughter. And she took on one of the most notorious cartels in all of Mexico. She carried a firearm and disguised herself as a healthcare worker, pollster, and even an election official in order to get the names and the addresses of the people responsible for her daughter's death. And because of this, she was able to get over half of the people involved arrested. And over the course of 3 years, she was able to capture almost every living member of the people that were involved in her daughter's kidnapping. And she became the voice and face of justice in Mexico. In 2017, armed men did break into her home and ended her life. But she fought to the end because her husband found her with her hand in her purse next to her firearm.
She died a mother, but lived a legend. A true story from the heart of Mexico's war on innocence. In a forgotten city carved out of northern Mexico's scorched earth, where death often arrives without warning and justice rarely does, one woman declared war on the impossible. She didn't have a badge. She didn't have backup. She didn't even have training. What she had was a daughter named Karen. And when Karen was ripped from her life, kidnapped in broad daylight, held for ransom, tortured, and murdered, the world expected Miriam Rodriguez to grieve quietly and disappear into the shadows like so many other mothers. But Miriam didn't disappear. She transformed. The pain didn't break her. It sharpened her. What followed was one of the most extraordinary acts of defiance in modern criminal history. A mother, devastated but determined, embarked on a lone crusade to track down her daughter's killers, members of one of Mexico's most violent drug cartels, the Zetas. Armed with disguises, fake IDs, a notebook, and eventually a pistol in her purse, Miriam Rodriguez became her own private investigator, intelligence analyst, and enforcer. She stalked her enemies across cities, posed as government workers, pollsters, even a health official. She interrogated families, studied routines, tricked grandmothers, and traced Facebook photos with the obsessive precision of someone who had nothing left to lose. She brought down 10 criminals, not through vengeance, but through purpose. In a country where more than 100,000 people have disappeared, and where justice often feels like a myth, Miriam made it real. Person by person, name by name. But in Mexico, justice isn't just rare, it's dangerous. Each step closer to the truth placed her further in the crosshairs. Her success was her death sentence. And in May of 2017, the cartel struck back, gunning her down outside her home. On Mother's Day, her pistol still sat in her purse. Her murder wasn't just a tragedy, it was a message. One meant to silence every grieving parent brave enough to fight back. But instead of silence, Miriam Rodriguez became something else entirely. A symbol, a fire, a mother who hunted monsters and refused to go quietly. This is the story of a woman who dared to challenge everything: organized crime, a broken justice system, a culture of silence, and the terrifying truth that, in some places, even grief must wear armor. Her name was Miriam Rodriguez. And this isn't just her story. It's the story of every mother forced to become a warrior, every parent robbed of answers, every town suffocating under fear, every life shattered, not by a single act of violence, but by a system that lets evil win. And yet, for one brief, incredible moment, one woman made evil run. San Fernando, Mexico. Miriam Rodriguez clutched a pistol in her purse as she moved briskly past the morning crowds on the bridge to Texas. Her steps were quick, but labored. She paused every few minutes, not just to catch her breath, but to steel herself and to study the photo of her next target, the florist. She had been tracking this man for a year, following digital breadcrumbs, interrogating the criminals he once ran with, even charming unsuspecting relatives into giving away his whereabouts. And now, after months of dead ends and quiet obsessions, she finally had a lead. A widow called to say he was selling flowers near the border. Miriam had been living in pursuit since 2014. That year, her 20-year-old daughter, Karen, was kidnapped and murdered. The police failed her. The system ignored her. So she took on the investigation herself and never stopped. With a relentless, meticulous fury, she disguised herself as a pollster, a health worker, even an election official. She cut her hair, dyed it bold red, and changed her name as often as she changed cities. She knocked on doors, invented fake stories, sat down with grandmothers and cousins who had no idea they were helping a grieving mother hunt their kin. She documented everything, every name, every face, every routine, and stuffed her findings into a black computer bag that became her constant companion. One by one, she hunted them down. She knew their lives better than they knew hers. She knew the florist had once sold flowers on street corners before joining the Zeta cartel. The same group that took her daughter. Now he was back to selling roses, trying to disappear into the ordinary. But Miriam wasn't looking for ordinary. She was looking for justice. Still in her pajamas, she threw a trench coat over her shoulders, pulled a baseball cap low over her fire engine red hair, and tucked her gun into her purse. She didn't stop to shower. There was no time. On the bridge, she scanned every vendor, but the florist had changed tactics. Today, he was selling sunglasses. When she finally spotted him, her heart surged. She got too close, too fast. He saw her. He recognized her. He ran. He bolted through the narrow pedestrian pass, weaving through startled passers-by. But Miriam, 56 years old and driven by something deeper than adrenaline, caught him by the shirt and slammed him against the railing. She drew her gun and pressed it into his back. "If you move, I'll shoot you," she said, and she meant it. For nearly an hour, she held him there, trembling but firm until the police arrived. In the span of just 3 years, Miriam Rodriguez captured nearly every living member of the group that had abducted her daughter. 10 people in all, a gallery of criminals trying to start new lives. One as a born-again Christian, another as a taxi driver, others as babysitters or car salesmen. But no reinvention could erase what they had done. Not in Miriam's eyes. Her campaign, equal parts justice and obsession, made her famous. But fame wasn't protection. In a place like San Fernando, no one challenged the cartels and survived. Miriam knew she had gone too far. She asked the government for armed protection. She was afraid now, not of death, but of what might come for her family if she failed. And then, on Mother's Day in 2017, just weeks after tracking down her latest target, she was gunned down outside her home. Her husband, watching television inside, found her lying face down in the street. Her hand was still in her purse, her gun beside her. In San Fernando, a city long haunted by silence and tragedy, Miriam Rodriguez became a symbol of everything broken in Mexico and everything beautiful in its people. Her story captured the soul of a nation tired of bearing its children and watching impunity win. A mother had to do the work of the state. A mother had to die just to be heard. Her investigation, reconstructed through case files, witness accounts, confessions, and dozens of interviews with police officers, friends, and local families, briefly changed San Fernando. People felt pride in her courage, rage at her death. The city honored her with a bronze plaque in its central plaza. Her son, Luis, took up her cause. He continued leading the collective of families whose loved ones had vanished. The authorities, late as ever, promised to catch those responsible for her murder. San Fernando, scarred by a decade of cartel warfare, massacres, and unrelenting grief, went quiet again. Not healed, just tired. Until July of this year. That's when a 14-year-old boy, Luciano Leal Garza, was kidnapped from the streets, the most public abduction since Karen Rodriguez. Miriam's son Luis was 36 now, and when he heard the news, he cried. Luciano had been kidnapped in one of his own family's trucks. Just like Karen, his parents paid 2 ransoms, just like Miriam's family had. But still, no Luciano. It was all happening again. The town stirred, people marched, volunteers formed search brigades and fanned out across the arid land. His mother, Annabel Garza, outspoken, fearless, became a voice for the more than 70,000 families searching for missing loved ones across Mexico. But this fight felt different. Miriam had shown them what determination looked like, but she also showed them the price. Her courage lit a path, but it also revealed a warning. Luciano's parents didn't want revenge. They didn't want arrests. They only wanted one thing, their son back. "Look, we all want to do what Miriam did," said Luciano's father on the 3-month anniversary of his son's disappearance. "But look at how things ended for her. Dead." And then he said the words that define the new reality. "That's our fear." A mother's hunt for her daughter. The walkie-talkie clipped to the kidnapper's belt buzzed again, a jarring burst of static that cut through the tense quiet. Miriam Rodriguez was pleading, her voice raw, trembling, begging him to return her daughter. Karen had been gone for weeks now, and in that time Miriam's world had collapsed into a blur of panicked phone calls, faceless threats, and ransom demands that dangled false hope like bait. It was a sickening rhythm. Each call brought a wave of adrenaline, each silence, a plunge into despair. When the kidnappers named their price, the Rodriguez family did what so many do in parts of Mexico. They turned to the only institution prepared for tragedy, a bank that offered lines of credit for ransom payments, a loan to buy back a daughter. They followed every demand for the letter. Karen's father dropped off the cash, a bag full of desperate prayers, near a health clinic, exactly as instructed. Then he waited at the local cemetery, his heart in his throat, expecting to see his daughter walk free. She never came. With nowhere left to turn, Miriam did something no mother should ever have to do. She requested a meeting with the local cartel. And to her astonishment, they said yes. She met one of them at El Junior, a modest restaurant in town, the kind of place that used to bustle with life before fear closed its doors. It was 2014, a year soaked in blood. In San Fernando, mass graves were so common that reports of 20 bodies barely registered anymore. The Zetas, once the armed enforcers of the Gulf Cartel, had become their own empire of terror, ruthless, efficient, and savage. They kidnapped innocents for ransom. They conscript civilians to fight. Sometimes they forced captives to kill one another for sport. Karen's older brother, Louis, had already fled the city, escaping the growing violence. But Karen stayed. She wanted to finish school, help out at Rodeo Boots, the small cowboy apparel shop her mother ran. She believed she could keep her head down. She believed, like many did, that staying quiet was enough to stay safe. But on January 23rd, her luck ended. As she was merging into traffic, 2 trucks boxed her in. Armed men leapt into her vehicle. She didn't stand a chance. They drove her straight to the Rodriguez family home, the same home where she slept during the week while Miriam worked across the border as a nanny. They didn't even take her somewhere remote. They tied her up, gagged her, and left her lying on the living room floor. And then came a knock at the door. It was the family's mechanic, the man Karen's uncle had been called to work on the truck. The kidnappers panicked. They grabbed him too, and then they disappeared. Now Miriam sat face to face with one of them, a slender, nervous young man who agreed to meet her at the restaurant. She begged him for mercy, for truth, all while his walkie-talkie continued to crackle next to him. He denied knowing anything, said the cartel didn't have her daughter. But then came the offer, $2,000, and maybe, just maybe, he could help find her. Through the static, Miriam heard someone call him by name, Sama. She paid him, then he vanished. Days passed, then other voices came. New callers, claiming to be the ones who had Karen. They needed more money. Not much, just $500 more. The family didn't believe them, but they sent it anyway, because that's what hope does to people. Each payment came with a flicker of light, just enough to blind Miriam from the truth she was already beginning to suspect. And with every lie, that light dimmed. Hope is a cruel poison for families of the missing. Some manage to let it go, to grieve, to heal, to move on. Others hold on to it like oxygen, but it eats them alive from the inside. For Miriam, the breaking point came quietly. Already separated from her husband, she moved in with her older daughter, Azalea. One morning, without fanfare or tears, she came downstairs and told Azalea what she now knew in her bones. Karen wasn't coming back. She said it plainly, like she was talking about the weather. "She's gone," she said. "She's probably dead." And then, just as plainly, she declared what came next. She was going to find the people who took Karen, all of them, one by one, and she wouldn't stop, not even if it killed her. Azalea watched as her mother transformed. The grief didn't disappear. It hardened. Her sorrow calcified into fury, and her hope mutated into purpose. From that moment forward, Miriam Rodriguez was no longer just a mother in mourning. She was something else entirely: Luciano's kidnapping. Living in San Fernando means living with certain truths, unspoken but ever present. In this city, kidnappings are not just tragedies, they are rituals of fear. Curfews aren't imposed by government decree, but by the quiet threat of violence. Just like residents of major cities learn to live with traffic or smog, the people of San Fernando learn to live with danger, with grief. Everyone knows someone: a missing son, a murdered cousin, a neighbor who disappeared without a trace. Entire blocks bear the scars: shuttered homes, whispered names, empty chairs at family tables. For a town of just 60,000 people, San Fernando carries a reputation that outweighs its size, a brutal legacy carved into its geography. It sits along a crucial corridor in the state of Tamaulipas. Just beyond its limits, a tangle of highways leads north, each road snaking toward border crossings with the United States. But where the highways end, dirt roads begin, and those scrubland paths are the lifelines of traffickers, routes for smuggling, for escape, for disappearance. In 2010, the city was rocked by horror. 72 Central American migrants were found slaughtered on a ranch at its outskirts, one of the most shocking cartel massacres in Mexico's history. At least it was, until the next year. That's when buses started disappearing. Passengers were abducted by the dozens. And then the graves appeared. Nearly 200 bodies unearthed from the earth surrounding San Fernando. Lives dumped like refuse, too many to comprehend. Some families fled, others stayed. They had built their lives here and refused to surrender it to the men with guns. One of those families was Luciano's. His grandfather, also named Luciano, had spent decades building a business from the ground up, a trucking company and a successful cinder block factory. His father, Luciano, ran a booming construction supply shop, and the youngest Luciano, just 14 years old, split his time between school and helping the men he looked up to. They were respected, prosperous, known in the community, and that made them targets. The family was all too familiar with the story of Karen Rodriguez and the unimaginable strength of her mother, Miriam. But the Garzas had already paid their own price. In 2012, Luciano's father was kidnapped and held for 33 harrowing days before being released. They knew how quickly life could be ripped away, so they adapted. They monitored their children obsessively. They changed routines, watched their backs. But it wasn't enough, because the kidnappers had evolved too. And this time, they were patients. They created a fake Facebook profile, a young girl seemingly innocent, and they used it to lure Luciano in. "You're very handsome," the message read. "I would love to meet you one day." For weeks they chatted, and on July 8, 2020, that day came. Luciano agreed to a quick meeting in the park. He had chores to finish and was watching one of his sisters, so he couldn't stay long. He messaged this as he got into the family truck, the same one he used to get around town. But within seconds of arriving, the trap was sprung. Armed men stormed the vehicle, shoved him aside, and took control, the same way Karen had been abducted 6 years ago. Just like that, he was gone. Luciano's family launched into action, flooding the city in a frantic search. They called everyone, checked every corner. It wasn't until they opened his Facebook account that the truth became clear. He had been baited, stalked, taken. Soon after, the kidnappers made contact. They let Luciano speak. His first words weren't about himself. He asked if his little sisters were safe. The next day, his father delivered the first ransom, a bag of cash left beside an abandoned dirt road just off the highway. It mirrored the same ritual Karen's father had followed, a tragic symmetry. But it wasn't enough. The kidnappers demanded a second payment. This time, Luciano's father drove 2 hours to a deserted gas station, placing the money between two worn-out tires. On the way back, the phone rang. The kidnappers promised to deliver Luciano that night, to bring him home. No one slept in the house. Every creak, every passing car, every shadow felt like it might be him. But morning came, and there was no Luciano. The phone went silent, and in that silence, the family knew he wasn't coming back. At least not in the way they had prayed for. Even then, they hesitated. Should they go to the police? Should they risk making things worse? But the truth was, they had already lost everything that mattered. The greatest fear one could have as a parent, his mother, Mrs. Garza, later said, is losing a child. She paused, her voice heavy. And they already did that to us. Breakthrough. Everyone shares too much online, even small-time gangsters. And Miriam Rodriguez knew. She just needed Sama to make one mistake. By then, she had already confirmed what her heart feared. Sama had been part of Karen's abduction. She learned this not through the police, but through the one person the cartel never intended to keep. The mechanic who had walked into their crime by accident and been kidnapped alongside her daughter. When the cartel let him go, Miriam sat with him, listened closely, and carefully peeled away every detail he could remember. Every face, every word, every sound, and still she wasn't done. Miriam transformed into a digital detective. She pored over Karen's old Facebook posts, scrolled through friends of friends, hunted for patterns, for hints, for shadows. One morning, stretched across the couch in exhaustion and determination, she froze. There on the screen was a photo, a Facebook picture, casually tagged with the name Sama, and she knew instantly it was him. That same slender frame, that clean-shaven face, the same man she had once begged in a restaurant to help her find her daughter. But she didn't just see him, she saw opportunity. Next to him in the photo stood a young woman, smiling in the uniform of an ice cream shop located 2 hours away in Ciudad Victoria. Miriam didn't hesitate. She began watching the store from a distance, again and again, studying the woman's work shifts until she knew them by heart. And then she waited, always waiting, until finally Sama showed up. She followed the couple back to their home, quietly, unnoticed. She marked the address and filed it away, but she knew that wasn't enough. If she wanted the police to act, really act, she needed more than a location. She needed a name, an identity, something they couldn't ignore. So she went undercover. She chopped off her hair, dyed it a fire-bright red, made herself unrecognizable. Then she pulled out an old uniform, one she had kept from a former, low-ranking job at the Ministry of Health. With an official-looking ID and a clipboard, she became someone else, a government worker conducting a neighborhood poll. For hours, she knocked on doors, feigned interest, asked harmless questions, until she finally had what she needed: basic identifying details of one of the men responsible for her daughter's disappearance. Her black satchel, worn and bursting with notes, had become a mobile case file, filled with names, addresses, photographs, and hand-scribbled maps. Her son, Luis, would later find that bag, holding photos of Sama alongside other men, each one linked to Karen's fate. But when she brought this evidence to the authorities, local, state, federal, doors slammed shut. Over and over. No one wanted to get involved. Still, she persisted. She carried that bag from one office to the next like a door-to-door salesperson, except she wasn't selling anything. She was demanding justice. And then finally one door opened. A federal officer, still in active duty today, sat across from her and watched in astonishment as she emptied her bag onto the table. When she pulled out her file, he said, "I had never seen anything like it." She had built the case alone, piece by piece, like a one-woman intelligence agency. She had gone to every single level of government, and they had slammed the door in her face, the officer recalled. Helping her hunt the people who took her daughter, it was the greatest privilege of my career. But by the time the government issued an arrest warrant, Sama was already gone. Frustrated but undeterred, Miriam doubled down. She hunted deeper, connected more dots. And before long, she had compiled even more photos, ones where Sama appeared with other suspects. And then fate intervened. September 15th, 2014, Mexican Independence Day. Luis, her son, was closing up his shop in Ciudad Victoria, getting ready to attend the celebrations. He had one last customer, a young, slender man browsing hats. Luis stared. It was him. Sama? Heart racing, he called his mother and followed Sama at a distance, carefully trying not to lose him before the police could arrive. Sama was arrested in the Central Plaza. He kicked and screamed the entire time, claiming to have a heart condition. but now he was in custody, and Miriam's investigation finally had its first breakthrough. During interrogation, Sama gave up what he knew, including names and details that Miriam hadn't yet uncovered. One of them was Christian Jose Zapata Gonzalez, just 18 years old, practically still a boy. The police found him and brought him in. Christian was scared, nervous, barely able to speak. As Miriam sat outside the interrogation room, she overheard him ask softly if he could see his mother. "I'm hungry," he said to an officer. Miriam's heart cracked. She stood up, walked into the room, and handed him the lunch she had packed for herself, a piece of fried chicken. Then she left, only to return moments later with a cold Coke from a nearby shop. The officer stared at her, stunned. "What were you thinking?" he asked. Miriam didn't hesitate. "He's still a child no matter what he did. And I am still a mother," she said. Later, her friend Idalia Saldivar Villavicencio, who was there that day, would recall what Miriam told her afterwards. "When I heard him just now, it was like my own child. Maybe her kindness opened something in him. Maybe it reminded him of who he used to be before the cartel. Because Christian talked, and what he revealed was chilling. I'm willing to take you to the ranch where they killed them," he said quietly, "where their bodies should still be buried." The search. The ranch sat alone, forgotten at the end of a dirt road, a graveyard with no headstones, only a decaying tractor marking the entrance. Its adobe walls were still riddled with bullet holes, ghosts of a shootout months earlier. According to Christian's confession, 6 of the cartel members had been gunned down here by the Mexican Marines. But what they left behind was something far darker. Miriam Rodriguez stepped over broken branches and past discarded trash, the ground cracking beneath her feet. She was looking for answers, but what she found was something no mother should ever see. Inside the skeletal remains of the ranch house, there were stains, grim, dried reminders of what had happened there. Bones, some no bigger than a finger, were scattered like litter. A noose hung from a low, gnarled branch outside, swaying in the wind. This was not a home, it was a slaughterhouse. And in the wreckage, something stopped her cold. A small pile of personal items tossed in a corner like they meant nothing. A scarf, one she recognized. Karen's, and beneath it, the cushion from Karen's pickup truck. Her breath caught. Time seemed to freeze. Karen had been here. Luis, her son, stood nearby. He had accompanied his mother that day, the same son who would later inherit her work and take over the collective she had built. A support network for families with missing loved ones, a place where grief and fury met action. Forensic teams later claimed Karen was not among the bodies discovered at the ranch, but Miriam didn't accept that. She pushed back, argued, demanded further investigation. She was right. A year later, a team of independent scientists uncovered a fragment of femur bone that matched Karen's DNA. She had been right all along. Many officials in the region respected Miriam, though not all liked her. She was sharp-tongued, relentless, and refused to be pacified. She called things as they were, swore when she had to, never apologized for demanding more than silence. Not everyone got along with her, admitted Gloria Garza, a state government official. But you respected her mission. On the way back from the ranch that day, Miriam passed a barbecue restaurant, one she knew well. 2 days after Karen's kidnapping, she had eaten there with her daughter Azalea. At the time, they were still clinging to hope, still believing a ransom would bring Karen home. That day at the restaurant, she had seen someone, a young woman named Elvia Uliza Betancourt, sitting alone, drinking a soda. Miriam had greeted her, casually asked if she had heard about Karen's disappearance. Everyone had by then, but Betancourt had played dumb, strangely detached. Now seeing that restaurant again, a realization struck her. The pieces clicked. Why had Betancourt acted so strangely? Why had she pretended not to know? Miriam felt rage bubble up. She had known this girl since childhood, a girl who'd been abandoned by a prostitute at the town brothel, a girl Miriam had once given Karen's old clothes to. And now she suspected that same girl had been watching the ranch, keeping lookout while Karen was held captive. Or worse, she raced home and tore back into her notes, chasing the thread. It led her straight to the prison, where she discovered that Betancourt was romantically involved with one of Karen's kidnappers, currently incarcerated for a separate crime. Miriam did what she had done before. She waited. Day after day, she sat outside the prison during visiting hours, studying the flow of people, until finally Betancourt showed up. The police were ready. They arrested her on the spot. Later, it would be revealed that some of the ransom calls, the very calls that tore Miriam's family apart, had come from Betancourt's house. But Miriam wasn't done. As time passed, her bag grew heavier with leads and scraps of truth she'd squeezed from reluctant mouths and overlooked files. But the longer the case dragged on, the fainter the trail became. Some of the people responsible were already dead, others locked up. But a few were hiding in plain sight, trying to become someone else. Taxi drivers, gas delivery men, even churchgoers. One name stood out, Enrique Yoel Rubio Flores. He had rebranded himself as a born-again Christian. So Miriam went to Aldama, a small town of 13,000, and paid a visit to the person who might know him best, his grandmother. The elderly woman sighed, worn down by time and secrets. "Yes," she admitted, "that boy has always been trouble, but at least now he's going to church." Miriam smiled politely, and then she began attending the same church. Week after week, she slipped into the pews, waiting, and sure enough, he came. The day the police arrested him, inside the chapel during service, the congregation looked on in disbelief. Some couldn't understand. One even approached Miriam, pleading for mercy. She didn't flinch. "Where was his compassion when they killed my daughter?" she replied. Luciano's kidnapping stirred something in San Fernando. Something raw, something that had long been buried beneath fear and silence. In this city, people don't usually speak out against organized crime. They don't march. They don't make noise. Because the risk isn't just high, it's absolute. Everyone knows how this works. The police probably won't do anything. But the cartel? They will. They always do. So, over time, silence became a survival strategy. People learned to look the other way, to tell yourself comforting lies. "They must have been involved in something bad," they'd whisper when someone disappeared. "They brought it on themselves." But Luciano's case shattered that illusion. He was 14, a child. He wasn't mixed up in anything. He was kind, helpful, just trying to live an ordinary life. And when he was taken, it felt like something snapped in San Fernando. That unspoken pact, that quiet understanding between the cartel and the people, collapsed. So like Miriam Rodriguez before them, Luciano's family broke the rules. They refused to suffer in silence. They refused to bow to fear. They called on neighbors and strangers alike. They asked people to march with them, to speak out, to demand the safe return of their boy. They organized search parties, held press conferences, and made themselves impossible to ignore. His mother, Annabelle Garza, recorded a desperate plea, her voice cracking as she begged the kidnappers to bring her son home. Drivers blared that recording through loudspeakers, looping it as they drove through the city streets. It became a soundtrack of grief and defiance. Posters of Luciano's face appeared in taquerias, on walls and shop windows. His young smile a haunting reminder of all that had been taken. In August, the family took their fight to Mexico City. They camped in tents in the heart of the capital, braving thunderstorms in plastic ponchos and worn shoes. "We don't care about the rain or anything else," his mother told television crews, huddled under the awnings of government buildings. "We just want our son back." The images spread, people paid attention, and eventually, finally, the government responded. They sent convoys of soldiers, police officers, and federal investigators into San Fernando. Twice, sometimes 3 times a week, they conducted searches. They combed the scrubland at the city's outskirts. Endless miles of dry, cracked soil and twisted trees. But no matter how far they looked, it was never enough. How many bodies lay buried in unnamed graves? How many had been forgotten altogether? Luis, the son of Miriam Rodriguez, knew this pain intimately. He had watched his mother wage a war for answers and win, only because one person, Christian, had finally talked. But Luciano's family had no Christian, no slip-up, no confession. In September, state police detained a known cartel leader in San Fernando. They hoped, begged, for information, but he said nothing. And by then, the truth had surfaced. The mastermind behind Luciano's kidnapping wasn't a stranger. It was family. Police had traced the fake Facebook account used to lure Luciano, and what Mrs. Garza had long suspected was confirmed. Several of her own cousins were involved. They had teamed up with local cartel members to extort the family for money. Betrayal doesn't always come from outside. Sometimes it's sitting across from you at family gatherings. But now those cousins were gone, vanished into the shadows, and the search for Luciano felt stalled, lifeless, empty motions, token efforts, and the calls started. Threats, messages from unknown numbers, warnings to stop the search, to stay silent. Mrs. Garza did what Miriam had done. She ignored them. But the danger was growing, and this time the family did what Miriam had also tried. They asked the government for protection. "Right now, what we are asking for," said Luciano's father, "and what Miriam asked for a number of times, is security." Then he added with painful clarity, "Are they waiting for them to kill us too?" A death on Mother's Day. Disappearances don't just steal people, they steal closure. They paralyze grief. They leave families trapped in an unending limbo, cursed with hope that refuses to die. And that hope becomes its own kind of torture. Miriam Rodriguez knew that pain intimately, but she wasn't the only one it changed. Her husband was once lively, social, grounded, strong. But after Karen disappeared, he withered. Day by day, his spirit dulled. He stayed home more often. He grew quiet. The sparkle in his disappeared eyes, and soon even his children barely recognized him. But for Miriam, grief had taken another shape. She didn't freeze. She burned. Justice became her oxygen. The pursuit gave her purpose. But that purpose came at a cost. Miriam wasn't just going after a few criminals. She was unsettling the entire order in San Fernando. She was exposing the failure of the government, the silence of society, and the fragility of the cartel's control. People admired her, but they also feared for her. Friends whispered, "Is she going too far? How long before they come for her too?" But Miriam had already made peace with that possibility. "I don't care if they kill me," she told her friend, Adalia Saldivar Villavicencio. "I died the day they killed my daughter. I want to end this. I'm going to take out the people who hurt my daughter, and they can do whatever they want to me." Then came March 2017. News broke. Nearly 24 prisoners had escaped the penitentiary in Ciudad Victoria, the very prison where many of Karen's killers had been sent because of Miriam's efforts. She was rattled. She asked the government for protection again. Authorities claimed they'd send periodic patrols to her home and her workplace, but it was a weak gesture, and everyone knew it. Even her family felt it wasn't enough. But Miriam, cast still on her foot, pain still in her bones, wasn't going to stop. In fact, just a few weeks before her death, she chased down yet another name on her list. The woman had fled San Fernando and taken a job as a live-in nanny in Ciudad Victoria. Miriam, undeterred, parked outside the family's home for days. She waited in the heat. She urinated in cups. She ran her car battery down, listening to the radio in the dark, losing sleep, losing strength, but never losing focus. Luis, her son, had to sneak out to her car and give her a jump. And when the police finally came to arrest the woman outside the house, Miriam tried to run, but her body failed her. She tripped and fractured her foot. Even on Mother's Day, she was still wearing the cast, still hobbling on crutches, still fighting. That night at 10:21 p.m., Miriam drove back to the small orange house where Karen once lived, the home she had shared with her husband again in her final months. She parked on the street, stepped out of her car slowly, and began limping toward the front door. A white Nissan truck crept up behind her. Inside it were men, escapees from that same prison she had once sent her daughter's killers to. They pulled out guns and opened fire. 13 bullets scored through the night. The streetlights caught the glint of her crutches as they fell. Miriam Rodriguez, mother, fighter, symbol, was gone. Her husband found her face down, hands still inside her purse, where her pistol sat, untouched. Her death wasn't just a tragedy, it was a statement, a warning, a message to everyone else who might dare to do what she had done. The government scrambled. They arrested 2 suspects within months. Another died in a gunfight. But the ones who ordered the hit, The ones who saw Miriam's strength and feared it? They remain unknown, untouched, powerful. Luis was consumed by the need to know who they were, but even he understood the message behind his mother's murder. Push too far, and the price is your life. I won't make the same mistakes as my mom, Luis said. He took over the collective of grieving families his mother had built. But it wasn't the same. The momentum faded. Some members broke off to form their own groups. Others simply fell silent, overwhelmed by the grief of losing not just a daughter, not just a mother, but a movement. Then, nearly a month after her death, a final name surfaced. Police in Veracruz, acting on information Miriam herself had provided, arrested yet another suspect in Karen's murder. The woman had tortured Karen, beaten her, hung her up like a punching bag, left her broken in every possible way. After the killing, she disappeared, moved to Veracruz, drive a taxi, raised a son. But even from beyond the grave, Miriam had found her. Because that's who she was. Not just a mother, not just a victim, but a force of nature. And in the end, justice moved. Because Miriam never stopped. Not 100 away. Luis arrived late to the funeral. The procession had already moved through San Fernando streets, slow, heavy, lined with people quietly watching as little Luciano's casket passed. A city still trembling with grief. Its people stood in silent witness. At the cemetery, a crowd circled the open grave. Luis stood off to the side, his shoulders trembling as tears streamed down his face. He cried, not just for Luciano, but for everything. For Karen, for his mother, for a city that had lost far too much. Authorities had found Luciano's body weeks earlier, buried in a shallow grave at the northern edge of town. A desolate place just past a patch of twisted acacia trees. His killers had hidden the site beneath trash, trying to mask the smell of death with rotting debris, hoping to confuse searchers. They nearly succeeded. Just weeks ago, volunteers had walked right past that very spot. Unaware, desperate, and heartbroken. When the body was found, the government gave no real answers. One official claimed they had triangulated the grave using cell phone towers, but no one believed that. Hours before Luciano was recovered, police had found the cousin, the one who helped orchestrate his abduction, bleeding in a hospital bed with a gunshot wound to the leg. He's now charged with both kidnapping and murder. Still, no explanation could dull the weight of what was lost. The people of San Fernando, long conditioned to avoid speaking of such things, didn't look away this time. They lined the streets as the funeral procession crept by, slow enough for hundreds of mourners on foot to follow. It was scorching, 100 degrees, but store clerks came outside with water bottles, handing them out to strangers as a simple act of shared grief. A mariachi band played softly near the burial site, their melodies like prayers carried by wind. Then came the speeches. Luciano's father stood over his son's coffin, voice trembling as he tried to say goodbye. "I want to thank you for being the perfect son," he said, fighting back sobs. "For bringing joy to all of us every day you were here. You are taking our hearts with you." His mother, Annabelle, looked out at the crowd, family, friends, strangers, and thanked them all for standing by her. "You have all taught my family that together we can fight back," she said, voice raw and strong. "We must rid ourselves of the fear to stand up and speak out." For Luis and Azalea, standing only feet away, it was impossible not to think of their own mother. Miriam Rodriguez, buried just 100 feet away. The parallels were sharp, too sharp to ignore. Miriam, too, had stood in front of crowds. She, too, had pleaded for justice. And her words that had once electrified San Fernando, now lived on, carved into a plaque on her mausoleum wall. Azalea couldn't hold back. She stepped forward and embraced Luciano's mother. The two women held on to each other for over a minute, sobbing in each other's arms. Luis, silent as ever, gave Luciano's father a firm handshake, but said almost nothing. He turned away, wiping his eyes. He had tried to help the family in the beginning. He introduced them to a trusted police contact, someone who had worked on Karen's case and investigated Miriam's murder. He'd even suggested that cadaver dogs be used in the search in case the worst had happened. But it hadn't gone well. At the time, Luciano's parents still clung to hope. They couldn't bring themselves to imagine he might be gone. "We aren't looking for a corpse," Annabelle had said, her voice sharp and final. Luis understood, but it broke something between them. After that, he stepped back. As the crowd slowly left the cemetery, Luis and Azalea didn't follow. They walked to the corner of the burial grounds where a church-like mausoleum stood, framed by tall, solemn cypress trees. Their mother lay there. That's what Karen did. Their lives had been shattered by violence, but at least they had a place to come and remember. Many families in Mexico never get that. No grave, no closure, just a name whispered into the wind. Luis and Azalea sat for a while, watching the light shift as the sun softened its bite. They really talked. For a brief moment, they allowed themselves to remember. Not the horror, but the love. The cemetery emptied, but they stayed, clinging to the silence, clinging to each other, clinging to the memory of everything they had lost, and the people who had once made their world whole. Some stories don't leave you. They stay, sitting heavy in your chest, not just because of what happened, but because of who it happened to. Miriam Rodriguez's story is one of those. It isn't just the story of a grieving mother. It's the story of what happens when grief refuses to sit still. When justice isn't handed to you, so you go out and take it. When the people meant to protect you turn their backs and you chase monsters with nothing but a folder, a disguise, and a mother's fire in your belly. Alone, Miriam hunted down her daughter's killers, not for revenge, but because no one else would. But there's always a cost. The kind of bravery Miriam showed doesn't come without risk. It rattles the silence. It breaks the unspoken rules that say, stay quiet, stay safe. Miriam didn't care. She knew the danger, and she kept going. And eventually the danger caught up. On Mother's Day, the bullets came. 13 rounds, a silencing. But not really, because Miriam's death wasn't just an ending. It was a spark, a warning, a wake-up call to a country that had grown used to ignore the cries of the disappeared. Her body fell, but her message stood taller than ever. Even the most ruthless cartels fear a mother with nothing left to lose. Years later, another family felt that same pain, the kidnapping of 14-year-old Luciano. And once again, San Fernando was asked to choose silence or courage. This time, something shifted. Miriam had lit a path. Luciano's parents, like her, spoke up. They marched. They wept on television. They played his voice through loudspeakers in the streets. And while their son didn't come home alive, their courage cracked through the fear that had gripped their town for so long. In their grief, they echoed the same strength that once lived in Miriam, proof that heartbreak can be inherited, but so can defiance. And what of Miriam's children? Luis and Azalea stood quietly at Luciano's funeral, just feet from where their mother and sister were buried. They understood, maybe better than anyone, what that loss feels like. But they also knew the rare comfort of having somewhere to grieve, of having answers. In a country filled with empty chairs and nameless graves, that's something. And even though her mother's movement faded after her death, her legacy did not. She taught her children, and all of us, that justice isn't just an institution. Sometimes it's a person with a notepad and who will keep asking questions. So let this not only be a story of death, but one of legacy, of what it means to love someone so fiercely that you change the world in their name. Miriam Rodriguez was one woman, but she left behind a blueprint for courage, for action, for dignity. She showed us what it looks like to fight when you're scared, to stand tall even when you're alone, to carry the weight of a broken system on your shoulders and still keep walking. She may be gone, but in every family that dares to speak out, in every search party that refuses to give up, in every mother who turns her pain into purpose, Miriam lives on.